The last chapter of The Midnight Road. Lutz couldn't tear his eyes away from the gruesome sight. Bud McGuire's face was frozen in a silent shriek, wide eyes fixed unblinking at the ceiling. His chest had been torn open crudely. The glinting white of ribs poked through the carnage. Bud's legs were bent at an impossible angle to his torso. He had been torn almost in two at the groin. The first scream that passed Sheriff Lutz's lips was quickly followed by a second. He fell backwards to the ground and landed hard on his rear, using the heels of his feet to push himself away from the mutilated corpse. His back pressed against the rusted green bathtub, and he idly noticed that the calico dress laying across the edge had a faint pattern of purple violets. Then Clarkson's strong brown hands were wrapped around his own, and his deputy hauled Lutz to his feet. They exited the broken bathroom and its grisly contents and went into the corridor, where Billy Hudson was already halfway down the stairs leading to the first floor. The ancient staircase creaked threatening beneath their boots as the two officers followed the younger man downstairs, desperate to get as far away from Bud McGuire's mutilated corpse as possible. Lutz burst out still open front door and stumbled down the porch steps. The humid summer air was like a soothing balm against his skin. His lungs heaved with the effort to draw in fresh breath and he sank to his knees, digging his fists into the hard gravel of the walkway. He could hear the footsteps of Deputy Clarkson and Billy sounding down the stairs and out onto the front lawn. They remained mercifully silent as Lutz fought against the waves of heat and chills that kept alternating their way through his veins. Distantly, as if observing someone else from far above, Lutz understood that he was having a panic attack. With shaking arms he shifted his weight until he was sitting on the lawn bordering the front path. Dry grass crackled as he brought his knees up to his forehead and sat there, breathing in the night air. Somewhere nearby a cricket chirped, breaking the stillness. Crickets were still chirping. Somehow, this was an encouraging thought. Lutz raised his head and looked for a moment at the night sky. The sun was still hours away from rising and the sky was pitch black, except for the thousands of glittering stars. Lutz took a deep breath and held it for a long moment before slowly exhaling. He repeated this steady breathing twice more then wearily got to his feet, wincing as both his knees cracked in protest. He brushed dry grass off the pants of his uniform and looked at his companions, both of whom had remained silently nearby this entire time. Nodding once in silent gratitude, Lutz resumed his authority as sheriff. None of them would speak a word of his temporary breakdown, but they could all feel a sudden shift in the atmosphere, as if a sudden bond of kinship had just been forged. Lutz knew that the three of them would forever be bound by the events of this night. Officer Clarkson looked to his senior officer. "Do you want to check the rest of the property? Look for the rest of the family?" Lutz began shaking his head almost immediately. "No, we found what we were looking for. This is officially a crime scene. It's also a 40-acre farm with 2 barns and at least 10 outbuildings. We need more men. You want to call in Miller and Sanchez?" Clarkson asked. Lutz nodded, but then shook his head. "Yeah, we'll call them in when we get back to the station. No radio signal out here worth a damn anyway. Besides, I think we also need to get on the phone with the mayor's office. We're going to need the forensics people in Iowa City or Davenport or wherever the hell." At this, Sheriff Lutz turned and began walking back the way they had come. He glanced back once more at the darkened windows of the McGuire farmhouse, which now seemed like looming eyes in the receding light from their flashlights. His boots crunched under the rough gravel of the long driveway as the 3 men headed back towards the car. The yellow, sickly-looking corn blocked their view on either side, looming far taller than a man even in this unhealthy state. Lutz was struck again by the eerie silence of the place. The humid summer air was heavy and still, not a breath of wind rustled through the stalks. The near-complete absence of sound made him antsy and uncomfortable. The sooner they were back to the car the better. Billy must have felt the same way. He trotted up alongside Lutz, his rifle loosely grasped in one hand now that they were out of the farmhouse. In a low voice he said, "What will happen now, Sheriff?" Lutz shrugged. "First, we're going to go back to the station. I have a bottle of Lagavulin 16 in a locked box in my office. Sheriff Bradley gave me that bottle the day I took office. Now, he told me this whiskey was peaty enough and smoky enough to burn away the worst night of your life, told me there would someday come the night when I would need it. It sat in its wooden box every night until I really started to think that day would never come. But come it did, and tonight I'm going to open that bottle and drink deep. And you'll drink with me, if you like." Heartened by this prospect, the men picked up the pace and within a few minutes they emerged from the McGuire's driveway back onto the smooth paved surface of Highway 99. Like an angel in the darkness, Lutz could see the police cruiser sitting on the edge of the road about 300 yards down. He breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that some secret part of him had expected the black and white Chevy to be gone, leaving them stranded at the McGuire farm. Lutz's palms were sweating, and he wiped them furtively on the thighs of his trousers. He checked his watch, then checked it again in disbelief. They had barely been gone 40 minutes. When they reached the car, Lutz fumbled in his pocket for his keys, then unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. His hands trembled on the steering wheel, and he wondered briefly if he was fit to drive. "Can't exactly ask Clarkson or Billy to chauffeur me home," he thought resignedly. Lutz unlocked the passenger and back doors, and his companions slid silently into their seats. Clarkson was still holding the buck rifle, and the shotgun was in Billy's lap, the mounted flashlight still beaming a bright circle on the car's upholstery. As one, the men fastened their seatbelts. The familiar, everyday click of the metal sliding into place struck him as utterly absurd after the night's events. Lutz slid the key to the Chevy into the ignition. He had a horrible, crawling feeling in the bottom of his stomach that when he turned the key, the engine would simply refuse to start. This was ridiculous since the cruiser was barely 3 years old and had never done anything but purr like a kitten. But tonight, right now, the car wouldn't start. Because it couldn't be this easy to just drive away. The key turned, and the motor roared to life, just as it always did. The front headlights came on, casting 2 wide beams of light into the darkness around them. Reflecting back, impossibly high against the skeletal pines of the forest, were a pair of glowing red eyes. Clarkson screamed first, throwing his hands over his face and crying out in terror. Lutz couldn't scream, his voice seemed to have completely locked itself away. His mouth gaped open in horror, but the only sound that came out was a strangled choke. Billy was scrambling to get out of the police cruiser, but since he was in the back the doors only opened from the outside. He tried rolling down the window, and when that failed he began to panic and bashed at the glass with his fist again and again, but this was equally ineffective. Billy raised the butt of the shotgun and drew back, preparing to ram it through the window of the car. "No!" Lutz roared, never taking his eyes from the glowing red orbs watching them from the forest. He jammed the clutch in, praying to anyone who might be listening that the car did not stall. He shifted into first, gave the engine some gas, and the car began slowly moving. This entire time he continued staring at the red eyes hovering 20 feet above them. They looked back unwaveringly, glittering with a malevolent intelligence. As the cruiser rolled past, the eyes followed their progress, but did not advance. Lutz fixed his gaze on the rearview mirror, waiting for some ravenous beast to come charging behind them. But there was nothing. The darkness of the night took over, and the eyes receded into the trees. Intent now on putting as much distance between himself and the McGuire farm as possible, Lutz laid one heavy boot on the gas. Only after 10 miles, when he could see the lights of Harry Gibson's fuel station, did he ease his boot off the accelerator and relax the hunched position of his shoulders. 10 minutes later they pulled up to the darkened windows of the sheriff's station. Lutz killed the engine of the cruiser and the 3 men sat in silence. After a long moment, Henry Clarkson opened his mouth. "What was that thing?" he began, but Lutz put up one hand and stopped him. Lutz shook his head, opened the door of the cruiser with a loud creak, and stepped outside. Every muscle in his body was accusing him of gross misconduct, and Lutz knew he would feel the punishment the next day. He unlocked the door to the sheriff's office and went in. The comfortable surroundings of the dingy sheriff's station almost brought him to tears. Weakly buzzing security fluorescents cast a dim, yellowish glow on the familiar disarray of desks and chairs. Without bothering to turn on the main lights, he crossed the bullpen to the corner office at the back of the station and went inside his office. On the bookcase against the far wall was a narrow wooden box, which Lutz now opened for the first time in 10 years. Nestled against dark silk was the bottle of Lagavulin 16, given to him by retiring Sheriff Bradley on his last day in office. "There will come a day when you need it." Lutz motioned to Clarkson and Billy, who had followed him into the station and now stood silently behind him, framing the door to his office. Clarkson had fetched 3 glasses from the small kitchen, and he set them down carefully on the stained wood of Lutz's desk. Andrew Lutz sat heavily in his black office chair. He twisted the cap off the bottle of scotch and poured 3 fingers into each glass. The amber liquid glinted dully in the dim light. The powerful, peaty smell of the alcohol bit into his nose as he raised his glass and the 2 men in front of him raised theirs. "Drink up," he advised. In the one smooth motion all 3 of them drained their glasses. The scotch blazed a fiery trail to his stomach. To burn the nightmares away. He reached to refill his glass. The end. Acknowledgements. Creative credit for this idea must be shared with my father Mark, who greatly enjoyed scaring the shit out of his children during long trips on dark country roads. Thank you for keep watching our video till the end.